Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Uh, this is Basic PDF Accessibility presented by Department of Disabilities Statewide IT Accessibility Initiative. Usual housekeeping items. As per usual, we have captioning available. We can click the closed captions button on your menu ribbon. Today's presentation is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel later this week. If anyone has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I will try to respond to them as they come up, but we are needing to get through quite a bit of content, so I might not answer all of them until we get to the end. I do want to mention also that what I am doing today, I am doing in Adobe Acrobat Pro, the paid version of the PDF reader. There are other tools out there that can do the same kind of work. However, we will always focus on the actual product itself. Since Adobe is the creator of PDFs, we want to make sure that we're working in their environment so that we understand everything. But all of the concepts that I'm going to talk about today, like tags and such, apply to any version or whatever tool you're using to work with PDFs. So should be universal in its application. With that, we can go ahead and start with today's learning objectives. So first, we want to learn how Adobe PDFs interact with assistive technology. Second, we're going to go through how to make a basic document accessible. And then third, we'll look at ways to make a scanned document readable. So everything we're covering today is the absolute basics for a simple text document with maybe a couple pictures. We've done previous webinars on more advanced concepts such as fillable forms or tables and lists and more complicated documents using like images overlaid on top of each other and such, things like flyers. But today is really just about how to turn a simple text document into something that is readable by assistive technology. So if you have questions about those other things, I will be able to provide links to our previous webinars at the end. So Adobe PDFs have what are called tags, and these are the building block of making a PDF accessible. It's different from a lot of other types of electronic documents because this is how Adobe communicates to other programs, software, what have you, or even to itself, how something is supposed to act. So essentially, tags are how the document is interpreted by both Adobe Acrobat and by other programs. So in the case of any kind of text, it can be a simple paragraph, but we can also make it behave and act as a heading or as a list or as if it was in a table. Even if visually it's not, we can tell it how it wants to act. A lot of other programs don't allow us to do that because things like Word has it already built into it. It's in the background. So it's always going to behave like that if you tell it to be that kind of element. In Adobe, I can make a chart work like a table. I can make a simple paragraph work like a table if I want, or I can make that table just look like normal text. So there's a lot more flexibility with PDFs, but that also presents a unique challenge because it means that we have to be very cognizant of what we're telling things to act like and making sure that that's going to make sense to our reader. The other important thing with the tag tree, which is the picture on screen, is it tells us the reading order. So in the case of this document here, you have the tag of just the entire document, and then you have the first section. And I'll explain all these tags later. But then we'll have a heading, we'll have two paragraphs, we'll have a list, another paragraph, another heading, a table, another heading, and two more paragraphs. So in the case of this document, it would be read in that order, top to bottom. That can be changed as freely as we want, but we need to make sure that we're putting it in that order that we want our reader to understand. Without these tags, other programs are going to have to guess. A lot of more sophisticated assistive technology, like screen readers like NVDA or JAWS, are able to look at a document, especially if it's real text ported from another program, and try to read it. And they might be able to read it, but they're going to miss important context, like that heading or if it's a list versus a table, things like that. It's not going to have that intrinsic formatting that we want to communicate to a user that's going to help them understand context and importance and emphasis. So we're leaving a lot more up to the guesswork of the reader and making them put a lot more effort into understanding the message we're trying to send to them. So that's why it's really important when we look at our PDFs that we take the time to make them function in the way we want the user to understand it. So common PDF tags, these are the ones that you're most likely to see. There's a lot more than just these, but most documents are going to have these. And it's going to be rare that you don't have at least a couple of them, particularly P, which is for the paragraph. This is your bog standard text. Pretty much any text that you just want people to read is going to be in a paragraph tag. You do usually want to separate these by actual paragraphs rather than putting multiple paragraphs together into a single tag. That will still read to a user, but by breaking it up, you make it so that a user doesn't have to read through the entire thing in one go, or you add that emphasis of, this is one paragraph and then you're starting the next one. Again, gives that user that kind of pause that we would normally visually see in between two paragraphs. Then we have H1 through H6, and these are the headings, and they have numbers associated with them. These headings provide important these headings provide a setup for a content section. So, that first heading, that H1 starts your document, tells you what the document is about. H2 will tell you what the next few paragraphs are about, so on and so forth. Another important thing with headings is that they can be used as bookmarks within a PDF. So when you're creating a PDF and you want to assign bookmarks, especially for a longer document like 10 pages or more, you can add those bookmarks based on your headings, so long as they're tagged and acting as headings. And that way a user, both visually and non-visually, has an easy way to move around the document quickly. So it provides a function in addition to providing context for information. Oh man, sorry. Allergies are really getting to me today. Okay, next will be link. So any kind of link to outside document or inside the document. This contains both the text and the reference for a link. So inside a link, you'll see two other tags. One's going to actually have the reference that it's going to. So where is this supposed to be going to? Is it to something later in the document? Is it to a website, to an email address, what have you? And then the text that actually displays to the user and tells them what this link is going to be for. And then figure. Figure is what Adobe calls images. So any image in your document or anything like a line or a group of lines, vectors, what have you, is going to be tagged as a figure. It can contain multiple other parts, but it's going to be treated as a single element. In most cases, it's going to read the alternative text that you provided instead of whatever's inside of it. Next is path. This is things like vectors, lines, other images types from graphics programs. If you're working in Illustrator or InDesign or Publisher or Canva, any of those kinds of things, you're going to see a lot of path tags because it's not able to interpret any other meaningful information from those things. Paths are a little bit different in that they're not treated as figures directly. So you can't give them alternative text. So in most cases, you're probably going to be putting the path inside of the figure or trying to treat it as such. In other cases, it might be there, but we might be trying to treat it as a background element. That artifact tag, which is the next one, I'm going to skip to that. Artifacts are anything that we want users to kind of skip over. Things like color splash on the background or page numbers where the program already tells us the page number, so we don't really need another thing telling us what page we're on. So artifacts will tell assistive technology and other programs, skip this, don't read it to the user. It's really just there for visual enhancement or for extraneous space filling. Now, the section tag, that's useful for organizing your tags. It doesn't actually read to users. What it does is gives us a way to kind of collapse and focus on either just a page or even part of a page when we're working with the document, so that we're not having to scroll through a list of all of the tags in a document. We can focus on a particular area. So it's very useful for organizing things. You might also see part, which is a similar one in the same idea. Sections are just a bit more uh, universal or more obvious. And so, but like I said, they don't read to users. So they're mostly used for your own purposes when you're working with the document. Now, PDF tags can be nested inside of each other. If any of you have worked with HTML, it's kind of the same idea in that you want to put these tags inside another tag. In most cases, what that does is treat something as part of that another element. So if you put a paragraph inside of a heading, it's going to treat that paragraph as part of that heading. But this is really important for specifically two element types, tables and lists. And if we don't nest these other tags inside those two, they're not going to function correctly. So we need to make sure that we do this. So table, the actual over or parent, but the umbrella tag is table. That's the one you'll see when you look at a table in a PDF. That table is going to consist of TR, or table rows. So every line of a table is going to be a separate TR tag. Inside of that tag, there will be either TH, which is a heading cell, or TD, a data cell. Heading cells are only a little bit different in that fact that when a screen reader or another assistive technology is reading cells in the rows below it, it will read the heading cell with it to maintain that relationship between data. And it's very useful for accessibility because it means the user doesn't have to try and figure out, are they in the right column for the right subject? It will read it along with them and make the experience better for them. And then data cells are just your standard cells that contain some form of information. What's important with tables is that we have the same number of those per row so that everything lines up correctly. Lists are kind of the same in that you have the parent tag, which is L, and that's for the list itself. And then you have LI, which is each list item. So every bullet point you have in the list is going to be inside an LI. Now, inside the LI, Adobe does something a little bit different. And this is a bit different from HTML or from other programs. There'll be potentially two tags here. There will always be an L body, which is the list item body. So this is the actual text that you're showing on that bullet point. In some cases, though, you might see a LBL, which is a label. If you're just using standard bullet points, this will probably not be there. But if you're using some kind of icon or like an arrow or some other kind of bullet point for visual purposes, it'll appear inside this tag. And all that really does is make sure that A, that element's tagged and not just treated as something else, and B, makes it able to be interpreted or at least skipped over by assistive technology. If that's not there and you're using something like an icon or like an arrow, it might try to read that as regular context or regular content, and assistive technology is not going to be able to interpret it because those usually don't have some kind of language equivalent. So it's not going to read arrow. It might just skip it or just be like unknown graphic. Whereas something like a bullet point, it recognizes that. So it'll just say bullet point and then, or bullet, and then read the text. So that's why label might show up if you're using something different. So let's walk through the tag tree so that you have a visual description of this, and I'll do my best to explain this as we're going along. Let me switch to my PDFs. This here. I need to hide my meeting controls so I can actually get to it. There we go. So I have two documents here. One, they're both the same document in that I created in Word and then sent it to PDF. One I made without any tags. This will be for later. But as Notice there's no tags available. So this document is completely inaccessible right now. The user would have to try and have their program read through it and try to understand it and read it out. And it's probably only going to read it as just plain text. This document, which is the one I originally created, is properly tagged. And if you notice on the right here, we have our accessibility tags. I am not able to zoom in further on this right now. So hopefully this is clear enough to everyone. If not, as I said, I'm going to try and describe this as best as I can. So anytime you create a document and it has tags, you're going to have a document tag that's just telling us this is all in one document. Then we have a section tag, and because this is, oh, screen share is very readable for me. Excellent. Thank you for that. It's good to hear. So as I said, the section tag is just for organizing. So this doesn't read to a user. They're not going to hear section, whatever, but it does provide organization. If I had more than a couple pages, I probably have more than one section tag. I see we have someone has raised their hand. Give me just a moment. Okay, you should be able to unmute and talk if you need to. All right, well, if it occurs to you, please put it in chat or we can get to it at the end. But I do need to move on. Thank you. Okay. So this document is broken up by headings, and we want to make sure that we're maintaining a outline of the document so that users can understand the importance. So we're going to start our document with an H1. So that's this first tag here. Then we have the text below it, and that's in a paragraph tag. I have it both in the accessibility tag tree, and then I have the examples in here as well. When I send out the recording, I will include this test document and the slide deck for you guys so that you're able to use it as kind of a guide for when you do this work yourself. And we have the H2, and this means this is the next major section, and that anything below it, it will be part of this section. So what are tags? We have a paragraph explaining that, and then we have an H3. And this H3, user understands this is a subsection of this previous section. So, in other words, this is what are tags, and then underneath that we have common PDF tags. So understanding this is an important section, and a user has a way to get to it quickly, but it's still part of this larger subject matter. And then for each of these, I have these in just paragraph tags. Again, this case, we just have everything in a paragraph. So on the left, as we're looking at the document, you see that purple outline. That outline is this current tag. And this also tells me as I move down this tree, this is how a user would read through my document if they were using assistive technology. So they're going down from H1 to the paragraph, to the H2, to the paragraph, to the H3, and then through all of these other paragraphs. Now, in this case, this one has two boxes. That's because inside of this paragraph, I have a separate link. So I have the actual text, which these little boxes just mean that is the content. It's not an actual tag in and of itself. So this content is held in this tag. It's going to be treated as part of this paragraph. Because I want the link to be read along with it, that's why the link is nested inside the paragraph. But this link has inside of it its text. So this is the text that we would see, and then its reference, this object JR. What this means is this is the actual link itself, the thing that sends you to a website. And that's why it has a different icon on the left here. So this is how that link is structured that we mentioned. But since it's nested inside the paragraph, when a user reads this, they'll read the whole paragraph along with that link. So it just makes a way so that the user doesn't get that broken up reading of link to outside source, like a website such as. And then they have to press the down arrow again to read this one that goes to the accessibility initiative link. They'll read it as one single sentence. I'm going to skip ahead, but as you can see, all of these are H3s and paragraphs and such. Then we have the table down here. And then inside this table, we have the table rows. We have 2 rows, so 2 rows of our table. And then each has 2 cells. So we have 2 heading cells and then another TH and another TD. While this is a TH, it's not going to read how we want it to read. So that's something we should probably change later. I'll show you how to do that. But for our purposes, when a user is reading this, assistive technology is able to read a table a bit differently because they're able to move from cell to cell rather than have to move through it like you would text. So what this does, if a user just immediately goes down to this data cell, they would hear column of office name, assistive technology program. So they would hear the heading for that column when they move into that column, and then the actual data inside that cell so that they understand that relationship without us having to do any additional work or them having to do the mental gymnastics of lining up cells to headings. Then we have the list here. Again, same idea. Whoops. Can open this up. We have a list item. So in this case, this list item contains this whole thing because I got a little bit cheeky later on and added a second list in here. So we have the L body that contains this whole thing. We have the first part of this first list item. Then I have a second list inside of here. And what this means is that now I have another list item for this list. So I kind of jumped the gun a little bit in that I made a list inside of another list here, and this is how it's tagged, but you can still kind of see the same structure of you have the parent, the list, then its list item, and then the content of that list item in an L body, and then the actual content itself. And then again, the user would read through the rest. They would read through, there's a couple blanks here. If you're working with Word and you send a document out to a PDF, you're probably going to come across a lot of these where if you're using like enter or space to create these spaces or something, or in some cases, there's just simply white space there because of a page break, these might show up. So for a user, they would hear a blank blank. So we'll need to get rid of those. I'll show you more about that later. But then we have another H2 where we start talking about images. And then we have the figure itself for the image. As you notice, it's all the way at the bottom. That means it's one of the last things a user is going to read. So that's the tag tree. The way it's listed out, that's how a user is going to read it. The nice thing about it is that I can also completely mess with this if I want. Like I could take this H3, and in order to change the reading order, I can move these around. So I can drag this up and down. If you notice, if I hover my mouse over the icon, that line appears. And what that's telling me is that it's going to put it after this H2, but before that paragraph. If I hover over the text itself, it indents. In this case, it opened up. But what that means, let me do it over the paragraph. Oh, no, it's going to open up again. What that means, though, there we go, is it's going to nest it inside that. So it's a bit different. So if I want it to just be the next item, I need to hover over the icon of the thing I want it to follow. If I want to be inside of another tag, then I have to hover over the tag name, and then I'll put it as the first item inside that tag, and I can move it around in there. Or it'll open up, and then if I want, I can just hover it there, and I can put it after that. So whatever option I want. In this case, I just put it inside the paragraph. Now, since I don't want it there, I need to hover it over under, or I need to hover over, click and drag, and then hover over the icon for this paragraph, and then it'll put it back where it was. So that's how you can adjust reading orders. You can just click and drag, or click something to select it, then click and drag, and you can just move it anywhere in the list that you want it to be. So now we're going to talk about how to make a PDF accessible. So this is where it becomes important to use Adobe Acrobat or a similar program. The free reader is able to read a document and at least tell you the document properties and if a document has tags. But in order to work directly with the tags or tag a document from the get-go, you'll need one of these paid programs. As I said, we're going to be working with Adobe Acrobat Pro, and it has its own accessibility tool. In this case, they call it Prepare for Accessibility, and that's what we'll be using today. There are three ways we can add tags. The first is the automatically tagged PDF. So this is what a lot of us call auto tagging. This is your first step. Most documents it's going to do a pretty decent job of, but there's usually a few things that you might need to fix or you might want to change context of in order to make it more user-friendly for someone using assistive technology. The second option is the reading order tool. In that case, it's the fix reading order button at the bottom that I've highlighted. And then finally, there's manual selection, where we'll be highlighting text itself and adding that to a tag, which is a more complicated process. And it's not something I would recommend starting out with, but in some cases with PDFs, because of how moody they can be, sometimes it requires us to do that work. So now we're going to walk through the tagging demonstration and check it afterwards. Now I'm going to work with the document that did not have tags. So if I did not have this accessibility tags window open already, what I could do is go to Menu, go to Document Properties, and then in the description here on this first tab at the bottom, we have tagged PDF. Since this says no, we know it is not accessible. If this said yes, this list would have tags in it. Like we could look at my other document and it would say the same. It would say yes here. And that would at least tell us it's readable and usable. It might not be fully accessible. There's a lot more that goes into judging that. But at the very least, we know that someone's put in that effort. And if we send it to a user, they should be able to at least make sense of it. So now what I'm going to go to do is All Tools, and then Prepare for Accessibility. When you first use Adobe, this is likely going to be like near the bottom, or you might need to click like View More or something to get to it. Because this is my job, I have moved it to all the way at the top because it's one of the tools I primarily use. So you can just click and drag it in the menu to do that. So useful for this. So my first step, as I said, is automatically tag PDF. I'm going to click it. And as you saw, that the little loading bar showed up, and now it's filled with tags. Now, if you notice, it's a lot different in structure from my original document. We have an H3, we have a bunch of paragraphs. In this case, this is still a paragraph. This is a figure, not a table. We have the list, but it doesn't have the first couple list items. And okay, got the figure right. So it got all of the content. It just didn't quite do what we wanted it to do because it's going off of what it's able to understand in terms of context and in terms of what it can kind of associate with nearby content. Well, that's context, but what it can associate with styling. That's a better way to put it. It thinks that because this text is larger, it's a heading, but it isn't able to understand this as a heading. All right. I see another question. Let's see if we can. All right. You should be able to unmute, Maria. Showing my meeting controls in case there's something else. All right. I'm not entirely sure that the permissions for speaking are working correctly. So you might need to put your question in chat If not, we can try and debug this later in the presentation, but let me get through everything for now. Apologies, I thought normally this works. So what we need to do now is there's a couple different ways we can fix this. First, we can use the fix reading order. So when I click this, we get a new dialog. This is the reading order dialog that gives us the ability to select content and change how it is tagged and change its function. When I move this over, if you look at my document, I'll close this tool just so we can see it. Oh, I took that away from me. Hold on. You can also use this Z icon right here. This is the reading order tool as well. I can use this to get the panel. The tags is better because the tags is kind of the final say in how a document is read. This reading order tool is kind of just another way to see that same content, but doesn't always, for whatever reason, match the tag tree. And the tag tree gets final say. So if your tag tree is correct and this isn't, don't worry about it. It's just a weird behavior of Adobe that I can't explain. But this tool is useful because it lets us select content and initially change it or tag content that didn't get tagged and hopefully give it the right order. So because this content is already tagged, it has this bounding box around it. These numbers indicate where in the order it is. So it gives us an easy way to understand how this content is read. But because this is tagged as an H3, I want to be a H1. So what I can do is I can click this heading 1 button, and that's going to change it. So if I now go to my tag tree, yep, it's turned into an H1. So it's going to have the correct content or correct tag now. And I can do this for other elements like this one. So I can change this to a H2, change that to an H3, so on and so forth. Now, in other cases, like this figure, I want this to actually act as a table. What I need to do, I can either select it, but in this case, I'm going to draw a box around it because, as you can see, my cursor is now a crosshair. And that lets me select this whole thing. Anything that's selected with this purple bounding box is in my current selection. If for whatever reason, say I drew this too wide and I have this content up here and this little empty space down here, I can remove that by holding Control, and then I get a little minus underneath my crosshair, and I can draw a box around those things and remove them. If I maybe do too much, like this, and I've removed some things I want, I can hold Shift, and that gives me a plus, and can add to my selection. You notice I'm always kind of drawing a good amount of space around the element I want. Reason for that is because if I draw like a box like through it, it's not going to select it. It needs all of the space around it plus a little more. So that might be a bit of a challenge if you have overlapping content. So be aware of that. Now that I've selected this, I can click Table. And now that should, if I move my reading order tool out of the way, open this up again, that change it to a table. Question, put it in this section tag. This sometimes happens when you create a table. It will put it inside a new section. I don't know why. It's just something Adobe does. Not a big deal. We can reorganize that. But now that's treated as a table. Now I could try and draw a box around each one and call it a cell. I find that harder to do because trying to line up with the actual cells and the content inside them is kind of difficult, in my opinion. So in most cases, what I do is I let it try to understand it, and then I kind of just fix it inside the tag tree with the manual entries. So I'll show you how to do that momentarily. Now, as I said, I can go through and mark everything else is what I want. I'm not going to do that now for the sake of time. The last thing I want to show is I can also mark other elements. Now, or as background elements, I can tell it ignore this or treat it as such. In this case, I think this blue rectangle is already one. But just in case, because it's untagged right now according to the reading order tool, because it didn't have a box around it. The new numbers 1 and 2 is because we're on page 2. So this is, the new reading order essentially. So that's why the numbers repeat. Don't worry about it. But in this case, I can click background artifact and that will treat that as such. Now, in this case, it added it to the reading order tool because otherwise there'd be a warning saying, hey, this is, this is an element that's not tagged. Now it is. Artifacts are a little odd in that they don't always show up in the tag tree as such. But if something's in here and you want it to be treated as an artifact, you can go ahead and change it in here to artifact and that will work. But sometimes they will show up in this reading order. Again, this is just a weird quirk of Adobe and how it works, but assistive technology should treat that as an element you can ignore. I can move this around inside this list as well to change reading order. In this case, it was the first element, now I've made it the fourth element. That really doesn't make a difference with an artifact. It should get skipped regardless, but in some cases, for your own purposes, so you understand your other elements, you might want to move it around. So that is how you would use the reading order tool. As I said, it's pretty simple, but it's very useful for tagging content that hasn't been tagged or for just quickly switching tags for things that are already done. Now, as remember, our table is now out of order. I don't know why this space is here. So what I need to do is I need to move this to where I want it. So in this case, we have, let's go through our tags here just so we know where we are. In this case, now I started doing it automatically because it's just sometimes how my brain works as I'm working through something. I double clicked on this tag and that lets me edit the tag directly. This isn't something I would expect most users to do. If you know the tag, in this case, I know that I want this to be an H3, like it as you can see on the actual text itself. So I can just write in H3 here. I need to make sure the H is capitalized, otherwise Adobe will not interpret it correctly. But that means that's now an H3. It's not how I would recommend first doing it because you need to know all the tags in order to do that. I just went ahead and did it accidentally because I was just reading through and trying to move on. But now I know where I want this table to be. So I can click it, select it, click and drag underneath this paragraph. And now it's where I want it to be. And I just had this blank tag. Oh no, that's the link. Why did that get put there? This is the fun part of Adobe for all of you who are either new to this or maybe worked with Adobe before and wondering why things happen. And sometimes this does this. So in this case, I'd need to move this. I would need to move this link to this actual paragraph. I would just do it the same way I just did. For the sake of time, I'm not going to. Now, when I have this table, I need to make sure this is correct. So in this case, it's not. So what I can do is I can right-click the table. I can select New Tag from the Content menu. And then I get this dialog that lets me list out all of the other types of tags. And as you notice, there are a lot. But I'm only going to concern myself with ones that are part of a table. So in this case, I need table row. I created the table row, and now I need to nest it inside the table. So I'm going to click and drag it so that's underneath the table. And there we go. Now I can use this one to create a second one. So I have my 2 rows. And then I can right click the first row. Same process, but I'm going to select header cells. And I need to nest it inside that row so that it's treated as part of that row. If I did not, then it would just be random cells in a table and it would not read correctly. And both Adobe and whatever assistive technology I'm using would tell me there's a problem here. Now I need to do the same thing for the next row, but I need to make sure it has data cells. Because otherwise it's going to try to read multiple cells at the same time, and Adobe will tell me there's a problem here. Now that I've done that, if you notice, our content is all in one single tag. So how do I break that up? And this is the the fun part, where in this case, I have my normal editing cursor and I can select this text. Now I need to select the tag I want to put this in first. If I don't do that, then it wouldn't work. Once I've done that, I can click and select that text as if I was going to copy and paste it. I don't want to draw like this case. If you notice, my cursor is telling me I can draw a box around something. That will not work. I have to use it as if I was trying to copy paste text. Now I can right click this tag I wanted, and I can click create tag from selection. And then, well, okay. I don't know why I did that. But it tried to pull it all apart. It's probably because these symbols, it's confusing and it's not treating it as text. So I need to go back and see if that worked. Um, in this case, theoretically, it should read this together to a user. Our problem here is that since it got split up like this, there is a very real chance that a screen reader is going to read this bit by bit instead of department name. It's probably, I'm assuming it's because I have the greater than less than symbols. So let me see if I can do just the text itself. Hopefully that will explain things. If not, then I just learned something new. Great. Nope, that split it up too. Okay. Unfortunately, yeah, this is now where we get into the troubleshooting part of working with PDFs. And this is where I would say either reach out to me or go look at some of our more advanced webinars on this topic. And we might go into where we have solutions for this. But this is always kind of the issue with Adobe and working with it, and that doesn't always behave how you want it to. And this is where that would be the process, but the process didn't work, so we need to figure something else out. But that's how you would create a table. In the case of this list, it's kind of the same concept of I have this list that's really a sublist of this one, but I want this first bullet point inside a list. So in this case, I'm going to create a new tag. I'm going to make it a separate list for the sake of simplicity. Boop. You know, the really annoying thing is that this actually worked when I did my practice run. So I don't know why it didn't work during this, but I'm just going to chalk that up to Murphy's Law. So I created my list and I created a new list item. Now I will nest that inside the list. And then inside the list item, I'm going to create list item body. And again, nesting it. I click the list body, and then I'm going to draw or highlight this text as if I was going to copy paste it and create tag from selection. And this one worked, so good. No problems with this one. But now we have that, that bounding box around our list item of, L equals a list. That's in the list item body of this. So when a screen reader finds this, it will say list of one item, list item, a list, or bullet L equals a list. So that's how you would manually create tags. You can also change them in the case of like that table before, or this figure, or this other list. I can right click this, I can click properties, and then this first drop down is type, and I can change this to whatever I want. So if I want this list to behave as a table for whatever reason, I can click that. And as you notice, it changed it to table. So this is how you can change the tags without having to know the tags by heart and editing them directly. If you edit them directly, just make sure that you copy the formatting. Pretty much all of them are going to be, using a capital as the first letter. But in the case of like section or part, section is sect, H2, H3, list item, or LI, L body, that kind of thing. So make sure that you know what the tag is before you try to edit directly. If you edit directly and you don't follow the proper formatting or call it the right thing, it's just going to treat it as content and just it's either not going to read correctly or it's going to give you an error and completely screw it up. So now we've tagged our document. What we're going to do is the next stage, go back to our accessibility tool, and we're going to check it. So we're going to click check for accessibility. This is our accessibility checker. By default, you're pretty much always going to have 31 of 32. I think the only thing that's not selected by default is table summary, which is not a requirement, so feel free to leave it. Other than that, I would suggest leaving it at default. I would also make sure don't check create accessibility report. The reason for that is because that creates a separate HTML file that will tell you the same thing. That's good for if you want to work off of that for whatever reason, or if you need to send it to someone else. But otherwise, you're just creating a number of files each time you run this thing on your document, and you're going to have those saved throughout, and it's going to create a mess of your filing system. So if you're just working with a document and using it to make sure that you're doing your work correctly, don't use that. I can click start checking, and now it gives us the accessibility checker. It's broken up to these sections: document, page content, forms, alternate text, tables, lists, and headings. Document is your basic properties. So is it tagged? What's its language? Does it have a title? In this case, that failed. Logical reading order and color contrast are always going to say needs manual check. That reading order is what we were talking about before, the tag tree. As long as we have gone through and double checked that, we've walked the tag tree, as we called it, where we just selected the first item and pressed our down arrow to make sure it's going through all of the elements and how we want a user to read it. We know that that's correct, so we can ignore that one. Color contrast, if you're are using anything but default, you might want to go check your colors using a color contrast analyzer. There's a number of free ones online. Adobe also has one. That's useful for it. We talk about it in our graphic design and our advanced PDFs webinars, so please refer to those for that. For title, we can fix this easily by right-clicking it and clicking fix. It gives us this description dialog. I will uncheck leave as is underneath title. And then here I can write in whatever I want. So in this case, 2025 PDF, accessibility, demo document, untagged. Okay, and now we have a title. So when a user opens the document, the program will tell them the title of the document rather than the file name of the document. It's really important because usually the title is more descriptive than the file name. In some cases, the file name might just be, the gobbledygook of a string that was created by Google search or whatever created this PDF in the first place. So, or the file name might be, a summarized version that doesn't give us as much information. So that's why titles are important. Everything else is passed, so that's great. If we did not have tagged content, it would show up here. In these cases, if you right-click this, it's not going to give you the fix option. So if I go to alternate text, so our figures, this failed because we haven't added alternate text yet. So I open this up. So as I open each of these, it will let me look at what the problem is. In this case, it's telling me the first figure, or figure 1, is the problem. I can click that, and it goes and highlights what that content is. As I said, I can't directly fix it. Well, okay, I can fix this one from here, probably because it's a dialog. But certain things, like if our table wasn't correct, then this would be, this would fail. And I'd have to say, actually, I could probably show you quick if I go do this quick. Okay, let me get rid of the heading cell. Boom. I just pressed delete when I selected it, so that's why that happened. I can go back into my accessibility checker. I can say check again. Now we have that issue. There we go. So in this case, regularity means that we don't have the same number of cells per row. And that's why this appeared. And in this case, it doesn't say fix because it can't give us a dialog to immediately fix that. So in this case, I'll select the element and I'll say show in tags panel. and that will move me to the tag tree to that element, and I can go do whatever I need to. In this case, create a new cell. In the case of the figures, when I click fix, it gives me the set alternate text dialog. Now, that is also this same add alternate text button in the tool, and it was the next thing I was going to show you. So if I click that, it'll tell us, hey, it will detect all images in the document and display that text, gives us the same dialog. And then here I can say empty tab logo. So, and then I click save and close, and that means I will have alternate text for this image. In the case of this other image, because I already marked that as a background element, it's already ignored. But if for whatever reason I don't think this image adds value for the user, I can click decorative figure, and that will do the same thing. So you have two ways to do it. I would recommend for if you're just working with any images, just use this because it's going to go through all of your images. So it's kind of just a one quick pass through everything. You can write in your alternate text. If you had multiple images, you would click the next button or the previous button to move through them. I can click save and close. And then I need to check this again in order to make sure that it worked. Okay, it's passed. If I don't check again, then it's just going to continue to say it's an error because it only checks this once. So now I've done that, I can check this. Oh, well, I didn't fix that. But that's how I would fix that issue. And it would work the same for most of the other tagged content. It would give me a list of what failed. I can click it and it'll highlight it in the document. Oh, useful link in the chat here for containers split into separate letters. Thank you for finding that. I will check that out. Because honestly, that's the first time that happened to me. Usually my issue is it taking other content along with it and then having to split it further. So that is very useful. Let me grab that link for everyone. And I will add this into the PDF for everyone, or not into the PDF, into the slide deck for everyone. So thank you for finding that. I really appreciate it. Okay. So that is the making the document accessible. Once we've kind of cleared all the errors, let me go back to that quick, sorry. Once we've cleared all the errors, we can be reasonably confident that we've made our document accessible. For more complicated documents, as I said, you might need to play around more, or we might need to look at some of the tips and tricks we've done in our advanced one, such as treating like a chart or something as a table, or making nested lists, that kind of thing. Or in the case of like a flyer, we might need to somehow separate elements or treat elements as a single thing or as an image, because if you put like text over top of a colored bar in order to make it stand out visually, Adobe sometimes struggles to separate that. Or if you do separate it and you treat the text in the background as something different, it might swap them so that the color bar is on top but the actual readable text is on the bottom, because that's how the screen reader wants to read it. And gets complicated, so we can turn that into a single element and treat it as such. But for any basic document you're sending to other people or posting online, like your newsletters or your emails or your reports, any of those kinds of things, you can be reasonably confident that you've made it fully accessible to everyone. It's a great job. The final thing I want to talk about is scan documents. I don't have time to demonstrate this here, but it's pretty simple, because for the most part, what you're going to do is you're going to convert this to real text using object character recognition, OCR. Optical, sorry, I always say object. I don't know why, but it's optical character recognition, OCR. In some cases, text might come out as indecipherable depending on the quality of your scan. So if that scan is like old, or it's been through like multiple passes, it might not be properly readable by the program, in which case you might need to treat text and such as images and add alt text that reads it correctly. Um, a more complicated process is exporting it to Word and then fixing it there and then sending it back to PDF. It's a bit longer because it does require some editing and maybe adding some screenshots if you have images and such in there. But that is the way to get the cleanest version. But for a basic scan, when you go into Adobe, you can either use Scan and OCR, where when you go to this, you would go to recognize text and you would say in this file, and then you would say all pages and recognize text, and that will read through it. The other version is to simply click edit a PDF, and if the PDF was not editable initially, it will do the same process. So two ways to do it. Fastest way is just click edit and then exit out of it so that it don't actually edit the document, but it will do the same process of read through the document and try to convert it into quote unquote real text. Once you've done that, you should be able to go through the process we did here of tagging the document. If you want to know more about scanning documents, please reach out. Happy to try and explain this or give you a demonstration. It's just we don't have time today to go through that process more than just talking it through, because really it's clicking two buttons. There are resources for more stuff about this. As I mentioned, we do have links to our PDF challenges and our PDF forms in the slide deck when I send it to you guys. You can also just go to our YouTube channel that they're there. We do have a document accessibility guide on our webpage, so you can reach that at mdod.maryland.gov. On the left, under resources, will be the IT Accessibility Initiative. That's the same page. The link on this slide deck will go straight there. And finally, please reach out to us. Our email address is mdod.nva@maryland.gov. Glad it was useful for everyone. I've seen some people saying thank you and it was helpful. I'm glad to hear that. I know there were a couple questions in the participants list. A couple of people raised their hand, but it didn't seem like it was allowing people to speak when I gave them the permissions. So I can try and do that again, or you can please feel free to just put it in the chat or reach out to me by email. I'll be happy to explain it. With that, are there any other questions? I've seen a lot of thank yous, so I'm glad this is helping people. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I'm going to stop the recording here.